Welcome back to another episode of Psychocinematic. Today, my guest is an Academy Award winner for production design. His name is James Price, and he won that Academy Award for Poor Things, and he also worked on the Iron Claw, which is insane. I can't wait to talk to him. So without further ado, here's James. So James, thank you for taking the time to be here and talk to me about Poor Things and your career. I gave a little bit of an intro about you beforehand, that you won an Academy Award for Best Production Design for Poor Things, and that you also worked on the Iron Claw. But I am curious, a little bit more about your background.
Hey everybody. I grew up on a small family farm in on the Welsh borders, and I was really dyslexic at school. So school didn't come very easy to me, especially English. And during the process of my schooling, I was going to become a stonemason to work for a company renovating old churches and cathedrals. And I was going to have an apprenticeship and go off to college in Bath at the age of 16 and become a stonemason's apprentice. And the last 2 weeks before I was supposed to start my apprenticeship, the company couldn't afford to take me on that year. And so there was a frantic couple of weeks before end of August, before colleges started, what I was going to do in September. So luckily, where I grew up, about 20 miles away, there's a fabulous independent art college at Hereford. And so I kind of went at 16 and did what we call a BTEC in the UK, and did a general art and design, which was 2 years of just everything you can think of. You try a bit of printmaking, bit of jewelry, woodwork, ceramics, video making if you wanted. There was editing facilities, and I was always kind of into 3D, so I specialized and kind of did painting and did a lot of 3D. And it was a fabulous 2 years. And during that process, found out that I could go to university. So this is the mid-90s. I could go to university, and university was free in the UK at that time. You didn't have to pay tuition fees. You got a grant to spend on accommodation and food and all the other stuff that you do at uni. And I went and did an applied arts degree. So again, carrying on with design making and built on that. So it was really Hereford which set me on a creative journey that I didn't really realize didn't know was an option, or think as an option at school. During that time, filmmaking, because back in the late 80s, early 90s, there wasn't really any films made in the UK. There was still a lot of TV, but the kind of all the Spielberg stuff that we made in the early 80s had stopped, I think, because the tax break had been kind of pulled back sometime in the mid 80s. Anyway, somebody suggested production design, and because of, or set design as we thought it was called, because I had a great love of film. I grew up watching films. That's what we grew up in the middle of nowhere. So, my hobby was watching movies, and my dad was big, avid movie watcher. So just like watch so many movies. So the fact that maybe I could incorporate my love for design and creating things with creating worlds, that seemed like a cool thing. Didn't know anything about it, didn't know how to get into that. And after college, I went to uni. I came down to London and tried to get some work experience and get started in an art department, which I eventually got some work experience, met a designer who was like, you don't really have the skills that you need for the art department. How about you think about going to Kingston? There's an MA there, master's degree, and it's 14 months, and you can go. And that's what I did. I managed to get on to the MA. After I'd finished, I managed to get my first job in the art department. And I sort of lied and said that I lived in Cardiff in Wales, but I didn't, and made it happen because I was desperate to have a creative job. I was just like thought. I remember reading a thing that Tarantino said. For years he felt he was sort of looking in at everybody in the restaurant eating, and he was stuck outside the restaurant in a glass window. And that always stuck to me. That feeling of before you break in or get into what you want to do, if that thing is like it's just there beyond the door. If I can just get in, it seems so unreachable, and you just kind of get more and more desperate. But eventually, it will happen.
So once you started working when you finally broke in, did you continuously get work, or was it like you were lucky to get one film and then there was like a ton of time and you're worried about how you're going to get the next one kind of thing?
No, to be honest, I was super lucky. Once I got in and got my start, I mean, my first job initially was for 2 weeks. By the end of the first week, I was asked to stay on for 16 weeks. And then on back of that job, one of the art directors had come in to draw one of the sets up, recommended me to another designer, and I pretty much didn't have any time off for maybe 3 or 4 years. It was a
Wow.
crazy. And Melanie Allen, who was the designer who I'd got the first job with, I went back to after once she'd got a next job, and I sort of worked with her and another designer called Charlotte Pearson for a period of 10 years maybe and went up and became an art director. And Melanie really trained me up because she'd been part of the BBC system, so I'd learned how to do everything properly, budget properly, how to, I just learned. I was super lucky to have such a grounding in the whole art department thing, and in all aspects of the art department. And they're on small projects, so everybody has to do everything. And I would, yeah, I couldn't have asked for a better training ground, really.
Hmm.
And in fact, I remember after about 3 years, I was like, to Mal, I was like, I can't do this job. I just need to have a break. I was exhausted. But yeah, it was super lucky. And they were all TV shows, so I didn't really do any films for the first few years. I always wanted to get into film, but there were a lot of episodic TV. We did a lot of TV movies as well, sort of 90-minute movies and things. If you look back at my IMDb, you'll see like there's loads of those. But it really was a good training ground.
Hmm. So you did a lot of school. Is that something that is kind of like a prerequisite to become a production designer? Do you think like you need to learn in a formal setting like that?
I mean, I was extremely lucky again because most of my education was paid for by the
Mm.
state at that time. I don't believe you necessarily need to go. I think doing, especially if you know that you're going to do something creative, I think doing a something like a BTEC like I did, where you can do that between 16 and 18 is really useful because that's a great grounding, gives you great creativity. I mean, then I kind of don't feel the next, like doing a degree per se is necessarily right for everybody if you can and you want to. But I definitely think you could get some real life work experience. If you knew that you wanted to get into the art department at 18, you could go and do that and then supplement your learning when you're not working on, say you want to draft, or you wanted to get into graphics, or you want to become a concept artist. There are a lot of short courses that you can do, especially in the UK. And in fact, you can do them virtually anywhere now with digital learning, remote learning, and build up your skill set that way, technical skills. So I don't necessarily think you need to, um, because it's a big chunk of money that you may not be able to afford to do. And during the early years of working in film, especially in the UK, the wages are not that great at the beginning. So to then get yourself into a lot of debt and then have to go kind of get yourself into more debt, because that's what it comes down to. You might be better just going, actually, I'm going to get myself into a bit of debt, do some work experience, get some unpaid work, and then figure it out that way rather than going for it whole hog. And then if you want to go back later and do a degree, maybe, yeah, I think that's what I tell everybody is I don't think it's a different time to the time that I was doing it. So, I'm very lucky I was, but I don't necessarily think you need to. Everybody's story to how they got into film is incredibly different, and there's no right or wrong way of doing it, other than you find everyone pretty much starts at the bottom and gets a runner's job, or if they know what department they want to be, they want to be in camera, they become a
Hmm.
camera trainee, so it's like you have to put your time in, generally.
So moving on to the more about production design and with Poor Things specifically, production design seems to me to be like the most important job in filmmaking that is the most unknown about, like that people don't think about. Like like you said, it set design sounds like a better term to help people understand, but there's just so much more that you guys do. But I had Toby Wilson on, who was a production designer for Blue Eye Samurai, and so that was an animated series. And the way he did production design, while I'm sure there's similarities, has got to be different being in an animated world. And so I'm sure this live action is a little bit different. And with Poor Things specifically, you guys had two production designers, which from what I understand is pretty unusual. So I'm curious what your role is like as production designer and co-production designer, and why you guys had two.
So the first bit about the difference between, I don't know, I've never done any animation. I would like to do some animation. I think designing environments for animation, world for animation would be really great fun, is that we physically have to build it in a real space. So animation is either virtually or on 2D if you're doing more traditional. I guess if you're doing stop motion animation, you still have to build it at scale. But yeah, so we have to deal with lots of fundamentals that you would deal with real life, building real buildings in real life, especially if you're doing something like Poor Things, Baxter's house, which is a composite set where you have essentially a real house that you can on a real street, one real building on a real street, and the other's a facade. But there's all sorts of safety because materials you have to adhere to. There's steel state frame structure in that. There's some timber. So there's the kind of which is what the art directors deal with and the construction managers deal with, the reality of building that. Whereas a production designer, you're much more like an architect, and you go, I want this thing to hover in space, and they're like, you can't do that. So the reason that Yorgos wanted two people, or thought that two people might be a good idea, is he kind of wanted, his filmmaking, he's always looking for a unique way to tell a story, and perhaps something that hasn't been done before. And because he did want to create a complete world, he rightly so felt that two brains would be probably better than one at that, and that we'd be constantly questioning one another. And if we got on, then you have different skill set. I mean, you do to a certain extent have two brains anyway, because you have a set decorator and a production designer and a supervising art director. The supervising art director always gets a bum deal, actually, because they don't get to go up and collect a shiny gold man when they really probably should, because they're an integral part, especially on something as big as those films, how those things are constructed and put together. So yeah, it was really, we were both apprehensive, purely because Shona had no experience in film. I had experience, but not on that scale, and also not really as a production designer. At the time I interviewed, I'd only actually designed one film. I got a lot of art directing, but yeah, so the thought of, it's been done a couple of times, Rogue One, they put a very experienced Doug Chan, who's the head of Lucas Art. I think that's what the company is called. And then Neil Lamont, the supervising art director. So you've got two complementary skills there that you're putting together to do, and very experienced at what they do, and probably two of the best at what they do, or did do. So that makes sense. But to put two kind of unknown, untested people makes no sense. But that's Yorgos. He meets people, spends a lot of time considering who would be appropriate to be a HOD, and then doesn't really care. And that's part of the reason I think his films are so unique. He's sort of not interested in the tried and tested route, because what that's going to deliver. Much rather go with something that's, and the whole way through he was like that. When we would be going, well, we could make this from miniature, or we could do this as a cutout, or and certain techniques. I can't think of any examples now, but I remember on numerous occasions saying to him, like, I don't think there's much of a chance of this working. Maybe we've got a 20% chance of this working. And he'd be like, well, let's just give it a go, and then we'll worry about it after. And then
Mm-hmm.
and that's fearless. It's just like being able to back himself to the hill, and that's in a safe environment then to experiment and play where you can do great things, or do something unusual and different. And so because of our lack of proper, I ducked and dive a lot, and Shona had come from much more a fashion background and editorial, and so which is much more conceptual than most general filmmaking. Most of your life you're trying to strive for photorealism, and Yorgos was like, believed that if we made this film, approached this film as if this was the way that films were still made today, not as they'd been made in the 30s when everything was on the studio backlot before people went out on location. And if that was still the case of way movies were made, and that we used all technologies that were still available, that were now available, like LED screens, then he believed that there would be a new aesthetic, and it wouldn't be a parody of it wouldn't be a love letter to that, but it would be a new thing. And I think we sort of hit the right note there. I mean, and I think a lot of other people do as well, because we've seemed to have had huge recognition and adulation and love, basically, for what we've done by our peers and the wider film community. It's been extraordinary.
Yeah. Real quick, did you say that you guys did use an LED screen at some point?
Yeah, so we used the ship, all of the ship build. So it was about 33 feet high and about 150-foot long, and it curved around the front. And so that when you look at the stuff on the ship, especially the stuff on the deck, I mean, because he shoots so wide, we're still shooting off top and bottom, and VFX sort of filled it in. But for the most part, all of those beautiful reflections on their face and in the glass and everything is real. It's real lighting.
That's awesome.
Yeah, absolutely. And then we also used them smaller, so around our miniatures, which were they were the chapter head miniatures, but the miniatures that feature in the main bit of the film, Alfie's exterior, the boat, Alexandria, there was an LED screen there as well, kind of not a volume, but a 3/4 screen, which we put the miniatures in front of. So that was all interactive light, and the backgrounds were on the screen, which was cool. And then we did some with the carriages as well. In much more of a traditional, what you would people do a lot with cars and stuff now. We basically had a toolbox. We talked about a toolbox of techniques, and then we would decide what was the best technique or tool to use for achieving that. I mean, Alexandria is a prime example of, there's a whole city and a whole moment of realization that the world is not a fair and just place for Bella to experience. But it's a very small bit on the page, and then so page count. And so in terms of how much resources, it comes down to resources as well at the end of the day, how much resources to build and time to do that. So that just shouted out to us as like, that's got to be a miniature. From early on, we were like, how do we do the slum, this decadence up top where they're having breakfast, and then the slum beyond and the horror of that, and fit that into a miniature and make people go believe that moment. Because it's like, that was a lot of worry from the get-go. We were like, that's the way to do it, but will people believe it? Will people believe that? And that's the tightrope which Yorgos helped everybody navigate, of how far to go one way or the other, because it is unique world. But I think by the time you get there, we've established it in such a way that people are just believing that, which is crazy.
Right. On that topic again of having two production designers, are you guys splitting up the work, or is everything collaborative? Every set you're working together on?
Yeah, it's completely collaborative. It's not like you take this, I'll do that. We didn't work that way. We just we worked separately, and then we'd come back together. And then also, I think some of the reasons that the cities are so interesting and there's so much detail is that one day maybe I'd be working on Lisbon, and then I would go over to London, and then Shona would go over to Lisbon, and we'd just we had two concept artists, Antonio and Jonas, who modeled everything in Blender, and we would spend a lot of time sat with them. We would scribble. We both have notebooks and sketch pads and scribble in them, or sketch. Mine are more like scribbles. Jonas are a bit more beautiful than mine, and we would then get ideas across and evolve, and we would quite often deconstruct buildings and put them together. The one which was kind of early on when we were first concepting was that I did a sketch. Actually, that was all on paper, and Shona did a sketch of Baxter's, and we sat down at a desk together and we cut up both our sketches and stuck it back together, and that became the basis of, oh, I like that bit, we'll stick that bit there and put that buttress there, and that window could go like that, and we stuck it back together, and that became the basis of Baxter's. And from that we were then here, I think Jonas was doing Baxter's, this is what, make this in 3D now, and then we changed it. But yeah, so we would work that way on some, but it was important that we got on, Shona and I think that was the most important. We figured that out early on, that we liked one another and respected one another. I mean, I was quite intimidated because she's a very well-known designer in the UK with her collaboration with Tim Walker, and so that was a little bit like, oh my gosh, how am I ever going to live up to that?
I would imagine too that you guys probably both learned something from each other since you come from two different worlds.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. The thing that I took from it was I haven't realized how blinkered you get after 20 years working in TV and film to kind of go down this photo real reference based idea and kind of close yourself off to some creative ideas maybe, or whatever. So it was like being back at art college. It was great fun. She'd be like, anything was possible again, because we were given the freedom where we hadn't had that. So it's trying to, I'm a bit like, oh yeah, now I'm like, oh, okay, what can we do that, maybe we get away with, but how can we be more creative about this and do something a bit more interesting than just going down the reference route, or,
Right. It's almost like taking, like the lifelike photo real stuff and then adding psychedelics to it and seeing what comes out of it now. Oh, it's an animal with a different head on it, things like that. The set design kind of matches that like quirkiness and that strangeness. But I did want to ask, like, what would you call this kind of set? And like the style, because it seems a little bit of steampunk, but that doesn't feel like the proper way to describe it.
We actually tried to stay away from steampunk, and I didn't like the word steampunk. I mean, in the script, but Baxter's got these mad animals that are running around the house. If that's a world where that can happen, and a world where an unborn child's brain can be put into an adult and reanimated, none of that stuff's possible. So you're like, surely anything's possible in our world. And we sat down early on and wrote a little dogma, I suppose you would call it. Talked about what we both like and don't like about periods of history, and I kind of call it magpie. Magpies, because anything was possible from any time. We would be looking at plastics and materials and aluminiums and stuff that just not right for when it was supposed to be set at the end 1800s. And then we were looking at modernism and brutalism, and then but also classical, and then the anatomical drawings of the period, which gave us the color of Baxter's house and this fact that he could create a world for Bella. So it sort of comes partly from Bella's imagination and partly from Baxter. So they're the two creators of the world, I suppose. It could have gone horribly wrong, I think. And also there's so much to design that and not a huge amount really of time, considering we were just completely going at full pelt, running a million miles an hour as fast as we could. And we'd put things in as placeholders and come back and think, oh, we'll rationalize that later. And, it'd be on the set, it would be made. And you're like, oh yeah, we were going to go back and we were going to back and refine that or whatever. So I think some of the magic of the sets is because it was just placeholder and it was no time to really over design it or really
Hmm.
overthink it.
I read that Poor Things is based on a novel, and I'm curious, did you find it important to go and read the novel or refer to the novel for some of the descriptions of the settings?
Well, no, I didn't actually read the novel, and nor did Shona. Yorgos said, "Don't read the novel because it will throw you off."
Hmm.
And he also didn't want us to, like I said, I think I mentioned earlier, he doesn't want you to preconceive anything. So he didn't want there, because the novel's very different, is my understanding. It's told from everybody's point of view, and Bella's point of view is right at the end. And there's a lot of Scottish nationalism going on. So the way that Tony McNamara and Yorgos were able to, the story that was interesting was Bella's point of view, and that's how they told it. So by the time, probably should have gone back and read it. It just, there wasn't time to do it. I mean, I might do one day, go back and read it. But we did look at the letters because Alistair Gray, who wrote the book, also did his own paintings, and in his paintings and the book cover, the original book cover, the one now has got Emma Stone as Bella on the front. But so we looked at the letters for inspiration for the writing, and then the pictures he does have weird kind of scale to them. So there definitely is influence in the scale looking back, and
Hmm.
scene where Baxter's dying at the end of the movie and they're sat on the sofa with him, Max and Bella, that, and he feels very big. There's a painting that Alistair Gray did, and it's kind of recreated that for that point. So in terms of the book, no, but the visual did feed into it, I think, a little
Yeah.
bit. Not stylistically because it looks very different, but
Hmm. Do you think you would have gotten this job had you already read the book before you met Yorgos for this?
um, I got no idea actually. I've got no idea. Um, what I've got no idea whether I'd have got the job if I'd have read the book. I mean, I got the job. Whether I wouldn't have got the job, who knows? We'll have to see. I'm not sure what he saw in me to do it, but anyway, he did.
The lensing in this movie is very particular and stylistic. I'm curious, does he relate to you, Yorgos, relate to you when he's going to do a wide angle lens or a fisheye? And does that figure into the way you design the set?
I'd seen the favorite, and I knew that the fisheye had been used in on the favorite, and I spoke to him early on and said, "Will you use the fisheye?" He was like, "Yes." I will use fisheye. And I know enough about working with filmmakers that I call instinctive filmmakers, rather than maybe technical filmmakers. Technical film and more like your action stuff, and there's like this is your sequence, and that's what you've got. That I would never, I mean, never did ask him, and I wouldn't expect that he would be able to say, "I'm gonna use the fisheye lens on this shot or in this thing." So we built, or Antonio built a lens in Blender and in Unreal because we did take the sets into Unreal in the end. Um, built the fisheye, so we knew that at any moment the fisheye could be used on our sets. And if you're dealing with straight lines and rooms that are kind of boxy, they don't look great. And most of my life, I've dealt with dealing design and art directing is that bit behind you is the most important that you can see. Whereas once you get a fisheye on, it's the bit of ceiling up there and the floor in front of me becomes the most important, which are always the things that you don't tend to worry about.
Hmm.
So I Shona had experience of it because Tim Walker's used a fisheye lens, and so she understood it. I bought a fisheye lens. I think I bought a 6 mil or 9 mil or something, put it on my Olympus, and just photographed my house, the street, going to work, so I could understand what it would do to environments that I knew well. Before this was before we built it in the blender and got an understanding that, so we were acutely aware that we needed to make sure our sets would look good on a fisheye lens, and so that was a lot of probably extra work that you wouldn't normally deal with. You wouldn't
Mhm.
even consider. You wouldn't spend all that money on plasterwork for the ceiling. So um, then there were moments that were more technical, say the rooftop where we did, that there were kind of anywhere that you spend a lot of time in, like Bella's house or Lisbon, Baxter's house rather. Um, we just had to be prepared for the fisheye lens.
Mhm.
But Blender and Unreal are an incredible tool because you can, as long as you've got the camera, I can't remember what they're called. They're like a camera grid, I think, for the lens grid. You can actually build the lens for real in that, and we can do that. We don't even need help from the VFX guys. In our own department, we're able to do that and pre-vis um, what that set's going to look like, and that's an amazing ability to have because you can guess what a 60, you can guess what a 12 mil is going to do. You can guess have experience. You know what a 75 is going to do from years and years and years, but no
Mhm.
one really uses a 4 mil, so
Mhm.
it's all new.
Yeah.
So, so
That's really fascinating. And the thing that you pointed out about the straight lines and not looking good with a fisheye, because I was noticing that in Baxter's house, a lot of circular stuff, whether it's with the structures, the windows, or just the like props, like the plates on the wall and so on. And I was going to ask you if that was intentional to add all the circular stuff in there.
yeah, so especially Baxter's house, the floors don't really have stop anywhere, and the ceilings, the walls, and they all sort of become one. So the pelmets of the curtains become part of the ceiling detail, then the floors come up, and that was conscious to do that because of the fisheye. But also, then there's a lot of bubbles that repeat. Baxter has this bubbles that come from gastric juices come from,
Mm.
and Bella's floating in a bubble. We used but the reoccurring theme of bubbles and around a world, and so uh, yeah, there were a lot of circular motifs used all throughout the movie. Actually, we would always try and do it in the round, I suppose, rather than straight lines, which is harder for harder for people to build. Not
Mm.
takes a lot more time and yeah, but more fun, you
I
know.
noticed on the cruise ship that a lot of the stuff was octagonal. Was there a reason that you had like eight-sided windows on there instead of the circles?
Well, some of that was to do with this idea that maybe everything would rock and roll on the ship. So we thought that if we made things square edged on that, that might be quite fun, as if you're
Hmm.
saying, the whole um, ship is, she's recaged. She's just been free. She's finally got free of Baxter and Max and is experiencing this great love affair in Lisbon, and she's free. And then um, she gets Duncan cages her up again. So there's a lot of caged animals on the artwork. The motif on the floor, the marble floor, is a tiger killing a goat. So the tiger's killing a goat. And the big chandeliers were tied back with chains so they wouldn't move. And so that this whole idea of her being caged up in the boat, and then the fact that things would roll around. So I think we went down a sort of rectangular route for that because of that. And also, we had to build that really short in a practical sense. We had to make that boat as if it was made in a factory because we didn't have a lot of time. So there was a big assembly plant going on, and things were done. Tiles were made and painted all in assembly. So everything was tried to be rationalized. So you were making components that could be fixed together. So a lot of redesign went into the boat just to make it able to be realized in a very short period of time.
I love that symbolism with, like the being caged and the chains and all that. That's awesome. I didn't notice that at all, which is great. I love when you can just keep picking things up with every watch. Now, while we're on the topic of windows, the I guess we'd call it the whorehouse in Paris that she ends up going to work at. Were the windows intentionally phallic?
Yeah, they were the penis window.
Yes. Okay. I'm not reading into that. Cool.
Uh, no, the point was that, and there's two big naked women outside too. The point was that it was supposed to be obvious that it was a brothel, um, to everyone except Bella. Bella's like, oh, it's a hotel. She had no idea. This sort of stuff, how quite funny it was.
When you guys are building one of these sets, does it get locked at some point, or while you're shooting, are changes actively being made to it if like the DP decides, oh, I need a light right here, or I'd rather shoot from this angle?
I mean, once you've handed it over to the shooting crew, it usually stays where it is. You may get an idea where, yeah, you might have to add a light on occasionally, but there's a standby crew to help with that. The DP might set practice, but that's kind of not that big a deal. It's not like saying I want this wall moved. That's not going to happen. So part of the evolution will be, but if you've done a lot of walk rounds and talked, most things stay the same. You might decide that you want to cut a hole in the wall to get the camera back to do a tracking shot, and if it's the end of the set's going to be pulled down the next day, you might do stuff like that. But there's a team usually to deal with that, and you'll get called to set to have a conversation what the best way is.
So when they do begin shooting, what does your role look like? Are you only getting called to set when there's a potential change or, thing they need to address?
So yeah, we will deliver the set, and that will usually happen. There'll be walk rounds before the actual filming day, but the final delivery is of the morning that you're going to do the first day's shoot on that set, and you'll hand it over to our standby team, and then also the DP and the director, make sure they're happy. And um, then there's usually another set to get onto and deliver. And so you can't really hang around that much. You might spend half an hour or an hour. Sometimes you just literally hand it over. And then when most of the crew, or not, well, once the cast turn up, you kind of go on and go where I've got so much more to do. And that usually happens right the way through the film, because you're always you always have sets to deliver and other things to prepare and get ready. I think that's maybe why the production designers aren't known about so much, because they are constantly up front delivering sets and realizing worlds, and so they're not part of that on-set crew.
My brain was thinking almost as if you had to have all the sets done at the same time rather than you finish a couple, they start shooting there, you move on to the next ones. That makes way more sense.
I mean, that would be great if you could finish them all before, because you'd have more prep, that meant.
Mm-hmm.
And then you'd have
Yeah.
another time. They'd actually sack you if that was the case. They'd be like, right, we don't need you anymore. All the sets are ready to go.
Yeah. So in Baxter's house, the dining room table, I'm curious, did you guys intentionally make the Bella's chair super big just to make her feel more adolescent, like a child?
Yeah, the table and Baxter's chair. In fact, all
Mm-hmm.
the chairs were oversized. They're beautifully made actually in Hungary, by a company who do I think it was by a company who do timber furniture, like kind of farmhouse, I suppose we'd call it, furniture. So yeah, it was all oversized to make her feel like a child, and in a fairy tale, really.
Yeah, that's really cool. I have noticed that the film is in black and white until she has sex, aside from when it shows her killing herself and then also getting the brain put into her. So like presumably like the virgin brain that's being put into her like until she has sex. Now that's in color. I'm wondering because I remember having like kind of like a visceral feeling once it was finally in color when you're in Baxter's home and I had no idea like the walls were going to be that color. Everything was shocking. It's not at all how I imagined because I had only seen it black and white at that point. Is that something that you were keeping in the back of your mind as you're making them that like, all right, they're going to see it first this way and then they're going to get a new experience with it?
No, because he never told us till the week before. It'd be black and white. In fact, they were doing lots of him and Robbie were doing lots of testing, uh, different stocks, and we thought maybe the flashbacks were going to be the reanimation scene was going to be black and white, But Yorgos really liked the way that house looked in black and white, and then decided, actually, let's shoot the whole beginning in black and white. And then, of course, it would have always been a jump when you went to Lisbon, but it's much more of a jump now. Now she's alive, she's out in the world. So that was kind of a key moment. Yeah, it was a really clever, with hindsight, it makes perfect sense. But yeah, we didn't know. So we didn't really plan. There's just a pair of curtains that are in Bella's room that are dye dipped, and they change from like raspberry color into this lovely green color. And the transition is very, very subtle, and it looks beautiful. And you don't ever see them in color in the film. I think you do see them on the plates at the beginning of the movie, and that was the kind of only shame, that we would have probably changed the colors, because in black and white they just look gray. You don't see the
Mm,
transition. So that would probably have been the only room that we'd have done any different, I think, would have been Bella's in terms of color, if we'd have known. But there was
gotcha.
enough texture. He was always going on about relief, put relief and texture into it. And some of those moldings were like 3 inches deep and crevices. So we kind of think that Yorgos always knew that he wanted to shoot it in black and white. He just didn't tell anybody. Probably because we would have tried to second guess what it would look like, and he wouldn't have
Hmm.
wanted that. So even if he'd known, he wouldn't have told us.
Yeah. He's keeping you on your toes, I suppose. If you went to work with him again, you would be like, I don't know what curveball he's gonna throw, but there will be one.
Absolutely.
This is something I really like asking. Were there any hiccups when you were in production for the production design? Maybe something that you weren't expecting, a wrench that was thrown in your gear, something like that.
I mean, early on, when we were still up, because we did the first phase of concepting and budgeting before the pandemic, and then we
Mm,
came back after the pandemic to start off to make the film properly. All the costs were way more expensive than what we budgeted, and we hadn't couldn't figure out why, because we were like, well, we know that designing them a little bit bigger, but not as much as what the disparity is. And so it took us a while to realize that all of the prices of all the materials had gone up 100%. In some instances, the metal had gone up 200%. The
wow.
shipping costs had tripled. And so that was a bit like, there was a moment there where we were panicking, going, we can't make this film as what we thought we could. So that was a bit of a worry. And then there's just general day-to-day issues with making building sets, the kind of God factor, if you will, that you just can't tell. You're in Hungary and it's 40 degrees, and I don't know what that is in Fahrenheit, but that's very hot. And then there's a freak thunderstorm, and the set that's being built, all the plaster work comes down, so because you can't predict that was going to happen, you can't get it watertight. There's a certain moment in a building, and then you lose a load of time because of that. So there's always things that go wrong, and props in the reanimating scene. We were trying to the Tesla towers weren't working the night before. They were so temperamental, and I asked them to. I got one of there was a miscommunication. I thought that they were like, oh yeah, we could just take it apart and and then rebuild it. And I thought they said that that was easy to do, and so I made them take
Mm,
it apart, and then they had to spend all night rebuilding it. And actually, it worked out fine. It worked better than it had done before. But by the time they'd taken it apart halfway, the translation had come back that actually it wasn't. I thought it was like an hour's job or 2 hours job, but it turned out. So that was a bit of a worry. I went to bed thinking, oh, are they ever going to get that back together for tomorrow? Because we're shooting that tomorrow. Um, but with filmmaking, you're always doing prototypes, every film, and that's why our job is particularly hard. All other departments deal with their bit of equipment, and it's the same bit of equipment. There's either you know, we are constantly making buildings, and when you're doing props, they're new, they're one of a kind. They're not. There's not. You've done a bit of R&D, but you haven't had 5 years worth of R&D to make sure this thing's going to work. Especially
right.
when an actor picks it up and does something, or an extra, it's not. it's not designed for for people who just think it's a real object. So there's always stuff goes wrong with props that
Mhm.
just because of the nature of it is that we are trying to deal with one-off things, you know. There was a good few things happened, but some of them I can't talk about.
Dang it. Um, I had never considered that with the cost after COVID, because yeah, I mean, like everyone's felt just the inflation or the the shortage of materials that were out there, the supply shortage, and wow, yeah, I had never considered that, kind of putting pressure on people's film budgets. So that's
Yeah,
fascinating.
but massively, but also things like ordering the material in time because we deal with very quick turnarounds in film, unlike say maybe the construction. But if you fall behind and material's not available, there's a delay. It's annoying, but with us, if we there isn't, you can't not be ready on the day that the set is ready to shoot. You know, it doesn't matter what happens getting up to that moment. And there's been over the years, there's been horrendous things that have happened leading up to the day of the shoot, and you're like, are we ever going to deliver this? But it has to be ready in one form or another for that crew to shoot up when it's been agreed. Um, so things like timber, we had to order timber way in advance, even though we may not have finalized the design because of just getting it there. It was just so, like you say, the supply was that it wasn't regular like it was before. I mean, we're still living in that world now as post pandemic
Mhm.
of a world where the supply chain is not as it was before. I think that world's gone where you could just get what you needed when you wanted it.
So when it comes to all of the sets that you guys had, were there any that didn't have to be built? They were just actual places.
There are a couple of real locations, the church, but it didn't have all the stripes on. There were very classical sculptures that which we covered with our own sculptures that were very kind of brutalist in shape that looked like they're part of the architecture. The medical schools were real locations, but the actual school bit, the bleachers, for want of a better word, the seating, that was all made and the floors. So where initially Yorgos wanted to build everything, but just purely by for time and cost, but bandwidth, really time. And but we came to a conclusion that we could go to certain locations, but we would need to give it a poor things makeover. So we
Hmm.
need to have more ability to do stuff than you would traditionally on, and especially on old locations, period locations, you normally can't do that much
Hmm.
intervention. But we went to places that we did a lot, so you could not tell, like the Lisbon hotel, you know, where the dance scene happens, the restaurant there, that was a location, but we did absolute number to that, put a whole floor in and windows and stuck shapes to the floor and ceiling, walls and ceiling, and brought the floor up into the ceiling, to the walls. So we did a huge amount of work there. Alfie's was a real location, but we shot the exterior as a model, so it kind of and lit them in such a way that they felt more stage-like. That was kind of how we got around having any real locations.
So I know you're saying that, maybe that doesn't require as much bandwidth, but I would imagine that that comes with its own set of struggles. Do you prefer to edit a real location like that or completely fabricate one?
Um, I mean, sometimes editing a location is fun. So, you know, for example, Iron Claw, that would have all been location work. And um, the Sportatorium, there was talk about building that early on. But I was like, we'd be much better off in terms of our budget restraint, finding somewhere that we can totally transform. So it's a different way of thinking, actually.
Mm.
When you're dealing with a location, it's just a different way of looking, different part of the brain. It's a different skill set, actually. Um, but if you've got time and money, then it's much more fun to build everything from scratch because you can control absolutely every single thing in that place. You know, there's
Gotcha.
no one saying you can't paint over that wall, or or whatever it might be, or I mean, you can usually get around that by putting a fake wall in front of it. So there are ways if you've got enough time
Hmm.
to do it. But yeah, um, sometimes it just calls to be on location, and other times it calls to be a set.
Hmm. So on your Instagram, it says martial artist. I'm curious what martial arts you do.
I've done Wing Chun for 20 years, Wing
Wow.
Chun Kung Fu. And I've been dabbling the last couple of years in some BJJ,
Hmm.
but I only did that after I got my black belt in Wing Chun. Um, so yeah, but I love it's a good way of staying in the present
Hmm.
because filmmaking is all about planning, and it's very my whole life is, especially the art department, is planning, thinking into the future, and not living in the present. And so martial arts is the one time that I get to be in the present, or
Hmm.
have to be. If you're not in the present, you
You're
know,
getting strangled.
yeah, somebody's going to hit you or strangle you. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
It's quite fun starting doing the BJJ as well because it's a totally different skill.
Yeah. What belt are you for jujitsu?
I'm still white belt,
Gotcha.
so very much. But I'm consistently inconsistent. That is my thing with martial arts. And I could never be in a team sport. Could have never done that because you like with work, you just can't go. It's just like you
Hmm.
can go. Um, so I like it that you can just drop in and do it. It takes me
Hmm.
years, way longer than anyone else to ever get up the run through martial arts. I just keep at it though.
Hmm.
Just yeah, you slowly build a little bit more experience and skill
Yeah.
set and stuff. You know.
Yeah, I do jujitsu as well. And I started, I think, in 2021. And yeah, I love it. And I totally get what you mean about being in the present because you can't think about anything else, even if you wanted to. Like you're just trying to breathe and, just not get your arm broken, something like that. You got this Academy Award now. Like, is the phone ringing off the hook? Do people want you to come and be their production designer?
It's interesting you say that. I haven't noticed it, no, but I think that's because I'm not available. I was already on something before, so we'll see when I finish this in September. Maybe it
Hmm.
will. People have been asking, you know, availability, but that all gets handled through the agents. So
Hmm.
I don't, I'm not asking them, oh, has anyone rung about me? Or, so not at the moment, but we'll see what happens.
Are you at liberty to say what you're working on right now?
Probably am not actually.
Okay. And then the Iron Claw, did you do that immediately following Poor Things?
Yeah, so we came back from Hungary in 2021 December, and then we did a good bit of work with VFX company. So we
Hmm.
worked with the edit, Yorgos Blackfish, who's Yorgos Lanthimos' editor, and the VFX editor, and we did sort of overpaintings and models and just helped kind of concept. We basically concepted any VFX that hadn't been done. Some of Lisbon, the upper parts of Lisbon, we hadn't got a chance to do when we were in uh, pre-production. So we went and did that. And Paris had changed quite a lot whilst we were so we sort of put placeholders on the top ups where the top ups were, and with the agreement that we would go back in post and do the top ups um, properly, design them properly rather than I think quite often the VFX companies get handed over a load of stuff that they've got to decipher. So we spent a bit of time working with Yorgos and just trying different things that we hadn't had chance to do before. And so we spent a few months doing that. And then in the summer I went over in 2022 to do Iron Claw with
Hmm.
Sean and yeah.
Sorry, I'm a little bit of a noob at this whole realm of production design. What are top ups?
Oh, sorry. So where the physical set ends that you've
Okay,
built to,
that's why.
top of the stage, the top up is so when you're in Lisbon and she looks up at the tram, for example, all of that is the VFX
Gotcha.
top up. Worked on that was all done in Blender. We took the scan of everything was LiDAR scanned in the of the set bit that we built, and then we married it up in Blender
Hmm.
with we would get the angle of maybe the shot that was going to be used, and sometimes you may have designed a top up for uh but you don't know early on, you don't know exactly the shot that's going to be that they're going to get in camera. So once we had that and knew that what was going to be used, we were able then to refine it and make it look better,
Hmm.
basically,
Gotcha.
and work with the VFX team to go, this is exactly what we want.
Hmm. So, final question: what was December 2023 like for you to have both of those films come out, at least in the States, in that month? It's got to be like a really rewarding feeling, like all that hard work for the last however many years you spent working on them.
Yeah, well, that was kind of crazy. A friend of mine, Matt Hannon, actually, who's the editor of Iron Claw, sent me a little video, and um he'd gone to see Poor Things, and he had this cinema in LA, and it's like there's the Poor Things poster, and he pans like that to the next theater, and there's the Iron Claw one. So like in theater five, it's Poor
Hmm.
Things, and I was like, wow, that's pretty cool.
Hmm.
So yeah, that was very cool actually. Bit mind blowing. And going to America to make a movie in the home of movie making is a bit of a dream come true. So it's kind of weird. I mean, a creative person, I think you dream about stuff and then it happens, and then that's just, oh, I've done that, and then you sort of just becomes normal. So it's sort of like, how do you top that? I mean, I don't know how you top the last 6 months that I've had. It's sort of go back to work and get back to normal life, I think is what the way to do it. But yeah, it was very special having both, because they're very different movies, and they're both, I love them both, and they show the different sides of me, I think.
Hmm.
The based in reality and the historical thing and a family drama, and then the pure
Hmm.
fantasy of Poor Things is kind of cool. It's not bad.
I mean, that's like every person who works in filmmaking's dream, like work with Yorgos and then also do an A24 film in the same, like having them come out in the same month of the same year. Like, I mean, that's all super cool stuff. And I really appreciate you coming on here to talk to me about Poor Things, because I mean, it's both that and The Iron Claw were two of my favorite films of 2023. And if ever in the future you want to come back on and talk about The Iron Claw, I'll give it another watch and start taking some notes about things to ask you. I would love to have you, but no pressure. I'm sure you're super busy.
Sure, yeah, no, we can sort that out sometime, in the next couple of months. That'd be
Yeah,
that'd be great. Love to
cool.
talk about Iron.
Well, is there anything you want to plug? Do you want people to follow you on Instagram or check out your website or anything like that?
Sure, follow me on Instagram. That'd be great. Yeah, that would be good. It's James Robert Ernest Price, I think, and it's, yeah,
All
movies,
right.
martial art,
Yeah,
music,
and
I think.
I'll put that down in the description as well so people can find the link to that. Well, anyways, thank you, James. I really appreciate it.
Thanks, Victor. It's brilliant. Nice speaking to you.